Okay, so you're very much aware of the theme that we're looking at here. We're following the footsteps of Jesus. We were doing it last quarter primarily through the Gospel of Mark, but we continue it through this quarter through the Gospel of John. And so I'm starting right in the first chapter of John, and I'm flicking that, but it wants to be green on that side before it goes. Now it'll go, away we go. I'm going to the very muddy Jordan. The Jordan River is a very interesting place, but it's kind of the place when you look at it, you think, oh, would you get baptised there? And so when tourists come to the Jordan today, they take them to this spot right up at the north of Jordan. In fact, you can actually see the weir that stops the Sea of Galilee flowing into the Jordan River and allows it to come through at a steady rate now. You can see it above where they have created for tourists a site for baptism. And so you can see when tourists go there, they love to have baptism. In fact, this particular photo is showing the two baptisms taking place on the right-hand side of the picture is actually a couple of people who were baptised on one of the Bible Land tours I went on many years ago. And the one at the top particularly was interesting because this was a pastor who had lost his wife and he had found a new lady in his life. And she was becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, so they kept the special occasion until they were on the Bible Land tour, and he actually baptised his wife there in the River Jordan. And there's also a story behind the bottom one as well. But it is a place where I also, in recent years, have taken the tours to that I've been involved in the Bible Lands. And we go here to experience, I guess, the sentiments of baptisms that are taking place right there. But here I'm asking the question, just whereabouts was it where Jesus was baptised in the River Jordan? Was it at that place which was right up there? It's the top red question mark on the screen that you're looking at. That's Yardenit, the tourist site of baptism. Never claimed to be the site where Jesus was baptised, but nice clean water. All right, as you go further down the Jordan, there are a couple of other sites. For example, there are two Bethanys, and it's often suggested that that's the Bethany place where Jesus was baptised. But I think the bottom one, the last one, right down there just above the Dead Sea, is probably the more likely one, and that's where I'm going to focus. But there was another place called Aion, which they don't really know where it was. It was near Salem, and they don't really know where it is either. And so it's somewhere there probably between those question marks. So let's go then to John and see what does John say to us about where the baptism took place. He says, this all happened at Bethany. The King James will have Bethabara, on the other side of Jordan where John was baptizing. All right? Now, for that reason, we'll take Bethany 2, known as Bethany beyond Jordan, as the place where Jesus was baptised. All right? So let's go there and have a look at this. It's a muddy little part of the river, and this is not the time of the year when the river is roaring. All right? It's quite low, but it's still muddy. And I want you just to keep that as a thought till we come to the end of this part of the story. And the interesting thing is, looking up the river here, we can see that there are two sides of the river that you can approach this from. I'm looking across and photographing the Israel side of the River Jordan, and standing on the Jordan, the state of Jordan, country side, where there is access to the river as well. And would you believe it, that those two markers that go out into the river are actually the country border. And you do not step out of them, otherwise you might hear a whistling something past your ear. But you can approach it from either side. And we've found it always easier in recent times to approach it from the Jordan side. And so here's a group of people, these are teachers, I think this group is, that were very happy to put their feet in and cool off in the Jordan River while we didn't actually hold any baptisms. But it was great to watch on the other side of the river. A whole busload of people came down, put on their white gowns, either went down and baptised themselves or had somebody else baptise them there in the River Jordan, because they had to be baptised in the River Jordan where Jesus was baptised. It just seemed to be, a sentimental thing that a lot of people have wanted to do. One of the things that has disturbed me is that stained glass windows and the artist have really well, I guess they're echoing the church, aren't they? The Christian church at large. And that they have John the Baptist standing outside, fully clothed, not wet at all, and just pouring something over him, even though his feet up to ankles are standing in the river. Why does the Bible say he was baptizing there? Because there was much water. And when he comes up out of the river, etc., you've got that language there that seems to describe very accurately that something was really happening here, a baptism by immersion. And so for the Jordan River, for this first one of the sites that we follow the footsteps of Jesus, I would like to suggest to you, it's a moment for me where you suddenly go, wow. A dove came down representing the Holy Spirit. God spoke, "This is my beloved Son." This was one of the God moments of his whole journey. And yet it took place in a disgusting, dirty, muddy river. You know, it's interesting. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are around us where the connection with God takes place. The important thing is to take the connection, because this symbolised what Jesus was doing in his whole ministry. He was coming down to a muddy world, and yet he went through with the contact with his Father to be able to go right through to the end. All right, from there, we're going to move to John chapter 2, where there's a wedding taking place, and you can see on the two little circles, Bethabara is the one down the bottom, and so we've now gone up to Cana. And here Jesus is attending a wedding, a country wedding, as we're going to find out. The city of Cana today, and by the way, there are 3 Canas in the Bible. All 3 of them claim to be the place where Jesus did his first miracle of turning the water into wine. But this is the most likely one, and the one that probably has the best evidence, and I'll point that out in just a moment. But it's a lovely little country town that today has grown up to be a significant place. And, people from all origins go there because in fact, as you're in the middle of town and you're heading towards the main church, which we believe is over the site, there's lots of pointers to where you're going, because all these tourist shops selling souvenirs love to sell you fermented and unfermented wine for you to take back to a wedding that you're going to attend to. And so it's quite a thing. In fact, right outside the actual courtyard of the main church that we're looking at in just a moment, there is a tourist shop which is selling you wine for your next wedding or for somebody's wedding. All right, it's a big thing. So this is the church that we want to have a look at. It's an actual Franciscan Catholic church at the moment. Now, if we look at the history of this site, it really goes back. In fact, when we look down under, you can actually go down and look at this right down at the bottom of the church, below the grotto even. You can see the archaeological evidence of some of the remains of what has been here before. And the archaeologists say that there was a 1st century church. Some say synagogue. And therefore, the last thing I read says it was probably a Jewish Christian synagogue church, where there were a lot of Jewish converts, but establishing a Christian church there on this sacred site. All right, that's why I sort of feel this has got the best record of probably where the actual miracle took place, because right there in the 1st century, at the end, the last decade, there is evidence that a church was begun to be built on that particular site. And so when you go inside, it's a lovely, nice, bright church, which is good, and there's not a lot of icons, which often you find in a Catholic church, Franciscan church as well. But the one thing that I really love, right at the front, above the altar, guess what? There are 6 large stone water jars. All right? And why I find this significant is because you're invited then to go down underneath in the little museum under the church, and there are stone water jars there. In fact, that's the same one looking on the top, but there are 2 of them which they claim are original stone water jars from the wedding. Now, we can't dismiss or accept that, really, but we'll say, okay. But certainly the concept of getting stone jars that were used for ceremonial washing, and they used stone jars instead of clay jars simply because they were more purified for the Jewish purification rites. And there's 6 of them there. And they took those 6 and Jesus asked them to be filled with water. And it says that each held from 20 to 30 gallons. Whoa. These are not the pouring type jars we're talking about that all the pictures show you. Let me just, for a minute, from the farm, Glenn, you and I would identify, and other people would identify this very much, before bulk handling and bulk fuel deliveries, etc., came to the farm was just covered in 44-gallon drums that we pumped into the tractors or into the vehicles, and so it would go. They're big drums, aren't they? All right. Now, I've got a cleaner one here to illustrate this. They said that these stone ceremonial jars held from 20 to 30 gallons. Look how far 20 to 30 gallons goes up a 44-gallon drum. On an average, that's just over half a drum. So when it says there were 6 of them, guess how much is the total amount of water turned into wine in a little country wedding? There is 150 litres on an average. Sorry, not litres, gallons on an average. That's about 3 of those drums full. Wow, what's going on here? So let me just quickly finish this off. This particular painting, again, is very typical of the paintings we see illustrating Jesus turning the water into wine, where it is using small jars that can be picked up and you can pour it. This is not what was happening here. These were water jars containing water for ceremonial washing, and they were quite large. And as it's believed, the church has a couple of them. Now, there is a second church not far away, a Greek Orthodox church. Doesn't have as long a tradition as the other one does in terms of its location, but it also claims, and you'll see it in a minute, a stone water ceremonial washing jar as well that was used. But I found it fascinating. This beautiful picture right at the top of the church as you're going into the church, they've got tiny little pouring jars there again. And somehow or other we've almost lost, I believe, one of the main meanings of what this parable or this sign story is all about. That one on the left-hand side, by the way, is one that this church claims is one of the original stone jars that Jesus had filled up with water as well. You can see they are quite large and they would hold a lot. The 2 on the other side are in a Jewish museum, and they are also purification jars made of stone, but they're of a later period where they were actually able to be put on a lathe and turned up a little more smoothly than the older, bigger, rougher ones. But my point I would like to share with you is this. Here is a wedding where Jesus attends, and we've got to see this. We've averaged it out already. 150 gallons of grape. What a superabundant amount of grape juice at a festival, at a wedding festival. When were they going to drink it all? Who knows? I don't even go in that part of the story. But what I want to try and get you to see here, remember these in John's Gospel are not called miracles, they're called signs, because almost every feature in the story is trying to point out something. And I think this part of the story is pointing out this, that Jesus has come to take the empty jars of Judaism and fill them with water that becomes grape juice, wine, that became the symbol of prosperity and the coming Messiah. And there was a superabundance of it. There was enough for everybody plus. And that's a marvellous illustration of the gospel, isn't it? The superabundance of the gospel, of what Christ has come to provide for each of us. And we now come, and I'm just going to fit this in, we now come to our third spot, and it's to Sychar. This is in John chapter 4. And by the way, this will be about your lesson this coming week. This is why I must get it in so you can visualise what's happening here this coming week. Sychar sits in Samaria. Now, Samaria, and we spoke about this, I think, on the first of these series, Samaria fitted in between Galilee and Judea, and people who were travelling from one to the other, you would think, okay, they've just got to go through Samaria. And there was a road going through Samaria too. But I want you to notice that the text actually says, now he had to go through Samaria. Do you know what most Jews did when they went from Judea up to Galilee? They would start travelling north, go down to Jericho, cross the Jordan River, and walk up the east side of the Jordan, and then cross it just before Galilee, and back into Galilee they came to avoid the Samaritans. All right? But Jesus had to go through Samaria. He had a divine appointment. Let's have a quick look at this. By the way, our guide stopped us on one of our travels going through here and said, these two photographs, and you can kind of see the grasses growing up and all the rest of it, but they are a part of the old Roman road. Jesus would have, his footsteps would have been on these roads when he was walking north. It's quite an incredible thing to actually realise that even though, of course, it's a modern highway that you travel on today. Well, that's just to give you a little bit of an idea of what it was like when we were going through there. Some pretty old, and by the way, these photos are nearly 40 years old because I've only been able to go to Sychar once. On one of the tours I led, I think it was 2 back into Jerusalem, I asked the guide, this is when we were planning here and he was over in Israel, I asked the guide, look, I'd like to go down through Sychar and get the story about Jacob's well and Jesus sitting on the well with the Samaritan woman. He said, well, at the moment, because of the hostilities, it's pretty tough. He said, but we can do it. What we do, we stop the coach on the outside of the city and they put you into an armoured plate bus and you then go through the city, you can get out, you can go to the church and the site and get back into the armoured plate and eventually we'll run you back to the bus and then you do the big circuit right around. Why? Because they'll stone you to death if you don't get in armour-plated bus. So I said, forget it, we won't go to Sychar. And I didn't even try for the next time after that. So it is an interesting place. And for example, the walls just behind that in that photograph is where we really want to go. But I thought you might be interested in this. These are goats walking down the street just at this point. And guess what? Some of those goats, can you see almost the one right in the foreground there is carrying his udder, her udder is in a big bag strapped over her back. And when you examine closely, there's about 5 or 6 of those female goats there. Their udders are so big, almost like cow udders, that they've got to hold them up and tie them to the back of their back. And I just, as somebody came from the bush, I guess I found that an interesting story. All right, we're going to go through the wall and into, when I went there in 86, this is all we saw. It was an old Greek Orthodox church again. It had been in ruins for some years, but notice the 2 entries there where you can go down the steps into the grotto of the original church. And in the interim since I've been there, so these are photos from the internet, they have actually rebuilt the Orthodox church there, and it is a wonderful, demonstration now as it stands over this site. So this is what you could see even in that ruined church. You go down, and there's Jacob's well down there. Now, the reason... Whoops, pressed the wrong button again. Let me see if I can get this back on track. I think it's that one. Whoops, there you go. All right. They sold us some photographs because back then, you're collecting photographs as well as taking photographs in slides for your camera. And so here's the woman at the well with her bucket there. And in more recent times, and by the way, the patriarch standing there at the well was also one of those photographs that were sold to us. But of more recent times, I saw this photo on the internet and I thought, this is interesting. This guy is actually drinking the water because the water from the well is still very usable, very drinkable. It is some of the best water in the whole region around. One thing it says in the text that you'll notice this week, the woman at the well says, but you haven't even got a bucket and the well is very deep. You have a look at all the rope that is around there, what lets the bucket down to get water and bring it back up again. There is over, I think it is about 30 metres deep. Whoa, for Old Testament times, that's a big well, isn't it? All right, so here's Jesus on the well, talking to this woman, and a long conversation, and you'll have opportunity to look at this conversation in your lesson next week, but a long conversation continues about this living water that he has come to present to her that will well up in her like a spring of eternal water. So that's what we're looking at in our lesson this week. And this is the place where that conversation took place. Also in Sychar, and I particularly want those in my Sabbath school class to see this, because I'm going to talk about it next week. This is a Samaritan Pentateuch, one of the oldest passages, or the oldest scroll, I guess we'd call it, of scripture that there is available. And the Samaritans have it. Because the Samaritans believe in the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, the Pentateuch, but that's all they've got. That's where it stops. And when the woman says to Jesus, you've told me some incredible things. You must be and she's wondering whether he is the Messiah, because there is a promise at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, well, not quite the end, I think it's chapter 18, where it speaks of that another prophet as the Messiah will come like Moses, who's going to be the great revealer. She knew her Pentateuch. All right, and let's go from that one. Also there, in fact, the Jacob's well actually sat on the land that was given to Joseph. So Joseph has a very strong connection with the people of Sychar as well. And it's interesting that even his casket is basically there, and it's honoured by Jews, Samaritans and Christians alike. And so it's interesting, right in the middle of this very strong Samaritan area, there are Jewish soldiers keeping guard and keeping watch and keeping peace there. All right, be a hard place to keep peace. My last photograph is something that also comes into the discussion with Jesus and this woman. She says to him, look, you Jews worship in Jerusalem at the temple, but we worship on this mountain, talking about Mount Gerizim that you could see. These photos are taken right there from Joseph's tomb site. And you look up onto the top of the mountain, and one photograph is enlarged there, where there's today a shrine up there. And back in Jesus' time, there was a shrine that was built from the time when the Jews returned from Babylon. They weren't allowed to help in the building of the city, the temple, etc. So they said, all right, well, we'll build our own. So that's where they built it. If you go there on Passover, they still slay an animal, a lamb, at Passover time, right up there on Mount Gerizim. And so it does become an interesting part of the discussion when you get into that part of John as well. So, just had to have one finishing slide. When we come to this part of the story, it really is a fascinating story to see how this whole dialogue conversation that we're looking at this week in the lesson, how it really centres in the local history of that town. See what else you can pick up as you go through with your lesson this week.